everyone, and welcome to a belated day 10 of the Happy Poly Day series. Today, I'm speaking to Purity to Polyamory, who specializes in talking about deconstructing religion within the context of polyamory. Welcome, Purity to Polyamory, and yeah, tell people more about what you do on your page.
Hello. I talk mostly on my page just about my evangelical background in Christianity, and I focus mostly on like recovery from purity culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I'll give a little spiel about what purity culture is in case anybody has been spared from that. But
Please do.
so basically, purity culture is the idea that you are looking for your one soulmate that God has for you, and you are basically um, basically holding off on being intimate in any way
Mm-hmm.
until marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So there is just like a ton of pressure within the church by pastors and by parents that are essentially saying like that you must not be sexual in any way
Mm-hmm.
before you're married. So I experienced that in my younger teen years. I became a Christian at a summer camp and was really involved in church and Bible study and all of that, and just like had this messaging taught to me that basically I needed to find my spouse and I needed to wait to get physical with them until the wedding day, pretty much.
Mm.
So coming from that background, I've obviously made like a pretty large journey into polyamory.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of evolution there. But I guess what I noticed back in the beginning of this year, I was kind of like looking for more resources that talked about polyamory in the context of religion. And
Mm.
I was really sort of unable to find that kind of account or focus. And
Mm.
so I ended up just opening my account and writing about my own personal experience. And it's sort of grown into a space where I just have a lot of people who come from that evangelical background. There's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people who come from Mormon backgrounds, just basically like any oppressive religious structure that taught purity culture.
Mm-hmm.
And people who are sort of recovering from that ideology. And then I think like I really like to say like at least here in the United States, most of our sex education is like abstinence only education. And
Mm.
so there's a flare of purity culture there as well. So I really feel like it's sort of targeted at pretty much anyone who just felt like shame and guilt around their sexuality at all,
Yeah.
and then is now sort of like making the very big transition that is getting into non-monogamy.
Yeah, yeah, like there are a lot of kind of like deconstructing religion accounts, and there are a lot of polyamory accounts, but I think yours is the first that actually kind of like marries the two concepts, which is, surprising that there wasn't something like this before, because like there are quite a lot of like ex-Mormons, ex-fundies, like ex-fees, like who got into polyamory later on. I mean, the like the three mountains triad, who are very, very well known on TikTok, like Janie from that triad, like she grew up like evangelical as well, and talks about that on her channel a little bit, but that's kind of not a specific focus of her channel, but it's just, I think it's really valuable that like you're creating this space and this kind of community, I guess, like for people to come together and talk about like the effects of purity culture. So like I'm coming at this from like I'm not a very religious person at all. Like I grew up in Hong Kong. My parents, well, my mom rather, like is Catholic, but she wasn't like a super strict Catholic. It was just kind of one of those like you know, if something good happens, she'll like whip out like God's name to say like, you know, like it was like his path or his way. And if something bad happens, then she'll be like, God has a plan. But like beyond that, like I didn't go to church. I didn't, you know, like I went to communion, but none of it like was taken like super seriously, you know, like we didn't like it was just kind of like uh something that my mom like would take out as a teachable moment whenever she felt it was convenient, rather than something that we kind of stuck to the book like constantly. So, you know, even though I was technically raised Catholic, you know, I don't like, you know, like I pretty much, you know, gave up on it when I was like 9 or 10, and my parents were just like, okay. So, you know, like I didn't have that kind of overshadowing kind of my views on sexuality and all that kind of thing. um so, you know, I'm very fascinated about with your story, you know, like kind of growing up with these beliefs. And also you said that you became Christian at a summer camp, so you weren't raised Christian.
Yeah, so my parents were, they were Christian, but they
Mhm.
were not like, there's definitely different levels. Like
Yeah.
for what you were talking about, like I'd say my mom definitely would consider herself a Christian, but she never really made any kind of like judgment or like shamed me for anything like that.
Hmm.
When I experienced that, that was more at the camp and like at the youth groups and churches that I got involved with myself.
Okay. Yeah, like
Yeah.
there are different levels, I think. In the UK there's a term for like Christians who like only really kind of like, you know, celebrate like their kind of Christianity like at special events, and they're called like Christmas and Easter Christians. So like
Yeah.
outside of Christmas and Easter, it's not a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that's like probably my family. And
Hmm.
so I think it actually like bodes well for me being able to have this space
Hmm.
because I have kind of a privilege in that my family would never like disown me to find out that I'm polyamorous.
Mm.
In fact, like at this point, they all know, and they all accept me and love me and everything. So I'm super thankful for that because I know that there's like a majority of my followers who have a lot of fear around coming out because of their family of origin. So
Right.
I do feel like I have like a great position. I was exposed to the extreme side of like judgmental Christianity
Hmm.
from my ex's family. And
Hmm.
so I spent like 16 years basically being subject to that. But because we are no longer together, like I don't really have to worry about what they think anymore. So
Yeah, yeah.
that's really nice. So I do feel like I was exposed to it. I understand it. I understand the shame and the guilt that comes along with it, and I have the freedom now to sort of speak out in a way that feels really good for me
Hmm.
and kind of maybe gives voice to people who are not able to talk about it as much.
Yeah, for sure. So like you mentioned, you know, like the more like an extreme ends of like judgment and shame. So could you possibly kind of share some anecdotes and give some examples of like, you know, how you know, significant moments like where like, you know, you felt like purity culture had made like a large impact on kind of your beliefs, and you know, anything that you kind of view as like shocking today, basically.
Yeah, so I mean, the rhetoric in the evangelical church around purity,
Hmm.
it varied depending on which church you went to and what the pastor decided how to illustrate. But basically there's so many like, I don't know, metaphors that they would use on us as teenagers. Like I've heard things like you're if you would be a chewed up piece of gum for your spouse if you like have sex before you're married, or you're ripping a piece of paper and you can never put it back together. Just like all of these like crazy metaphors. And like there was purity rings in Christian bookstores that you could go and like your dad could give you a purity ring and like you could pledge your purity with a purity card. So just like all of this like huge amount of pressure as teenagers to make these promises that were basically like combating like our awakening sexualities, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so I think like just we were put in these positions that we were starting to have these feelings and hormones and everything flowing, and like instead we had to like hide it and suppress it, and
Mm-hmm.
that just like breeds unhealthy feelings and shame and guilt. And for myself, I started dating my ex when I was 16, and just, I mean, every single time we would have some kind of physical encounter or whatever, like I would feel this immense amount of guilt afterwards and be crying and just be like, oh my gosh, like we can't do this again. We can't do this, you know, and it just weighed on me so heavily. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And do you
so
think
I
it sorry, keep going.
Oh no, it's fine. And so like, I mean, we did that for the better part of 2 years. And I was from the ages of like, I think I was about to turn 17 when we started dating, until 19.
Mm-hmm.
We did this like we should or you know, obviously we get hot and horny and then like do things, and then afterwards like me just break down and feel terrible.
Mm.
And we did that for like 2 years, and then finally like he had proposed, and so I'm like, okay, I'm definitely marrying him, like I have a ring on my finger, and so I'm married in my heart. That's totally a thing that you would hear like evangelical Christians say, like we are married in our heart, like it's okay now, right? Just anything to justify it. And so we finally like had like PIV sex or whatever, like
Yeah.
you know, like I mean we were doing other sexual things, but like that's, you know, it's just so stupid. It's like that's the thing that we were supposedly not supposed to be doing. So and then after that, like it just like the guilt was terrible for me. And we were like so oddly and weirdly confronted by his family, and like that was like asking us about our like personal intimate life, and for some reason my ex thought it was a good idea to like share this information with them.
Oh
And
God.
yeah, and so then it was just like 6 months of like just being treated like basically I was a terrible human being. It was such mind fuckery basically.
Yeah.
Up until the wedding day, and then we got married, and I remember distinctly like coming back from our honeymoon and seeing my in-laws again, and all of a sudden I was treated like this amazing human, like because I was a wife now. And so it was really, really difficult to kind of like make that switch.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
and then on top of that, like basically you're telling these young kids like don't think about sex, don't act like you enjoy sex, like you become like almost sexually repulsed in a way because you're being trained to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
um and so then it's like, but then all of a sudden you're supposed to flip a switch and you become a spouse, and suddenly you're supposed to have this incredible sex life that God is apparently going to bless you with if you wait.
Oh
And it
my
just doesn't
God.
work like that. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So you just literally you flip from, sex is this like, no good thing that's going to send you to hell. And it's basically kind of like in some religions, like I've been told that it's like a sin like akin to murder basically. And then you kind of flip that from like this like God-given gift that you should save like for your one true love, and it's like, wait, so this bad thing you're supposed to save it for your one true love, and like that doesn't go together.
right, yeah. And then like within the context of marriage, if you had gotten that far,
Mm-hmm.
you suddenly are, for a lot of especially women
Mm-hmm.
in marriage, in the church,
Mm-hmm.
you are really basically encouraged to sort of just do whatever your husband asks you to
Mm-hmm.
do. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and so I wrote about this a few weeks ago and asked for people's experiences, and lots of people wrote in basically sharing about how the church kind of encourages this thought process of you are your husband's helper or whatever, and whenever they want it, you must give it to them. So
Mm.
imagine like, you basically believing that sex is like evil and you can't think about it, and then the next week being told you have to say yes no matter what.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine there'd be a lot of pressure on women in particular. And I wonder, could you speak more on like how gender kind of factored into like the effects of purity culture, like on an individual?
Yeah, so I mean, from the conversations I've had with men who were a part of purity culture, I don't think it was just women. I think that we women are I think maybe more affected because of that idea of just sort of like you're serving your husband or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think for men, it's like you become kind of like that whole idea like men are pigs, like you just have to give it to them whenever. And
Hmm.
like for myself and what happened with us is like I think we just had different like drives,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that's not wrong, it's just a fact, like it's just a simple fact. And instead of me sort of trying to like communicate through that with him, like instead I pretty much like shamed him for his desires and what he wanted and like
Mm.
how often he wanted it and all of that.
Hmm.
And so it just became this like huge dance of me shaming or him, him asking me not feeling that, me shaming him, and like resentment building because of that.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
so yeah, I definitely think all of that, is a huge factor. The other thing that sort of comes up a lot that we talk about is the idea of that you basically like cannot be friends with the opposite gender, like you sort of cut off like you
Mm.
know and so because like I remember this distinct story where a pastor was sharing about how if he is so like the term is above reproach, that um if if he's on an elevator and a woman walks on, he will immediately get off the elevator. Like he won't stay on it to ride to the next floor or whatever, because he won't be alone with a woman. Like this is a real story that was shared to my
Because
younger.
of what, like a woman is so inherently sexual that he can't stand to be put near her, like.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing is like it's really just making it that all sexuality and everything is in the hands of a woman. Like it's our responsibility. It's and then again going back to like how we serve our husbands, it all comes back to us. Like
Hmm.
so it just, and that is why like we many of us who are like speaking out about it say like purity culture is rape culture. Like
Mm. Mm.
it genuinely makes it so that all of a man's desires and sexuality and everything is like the woman's responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can absolutely see like the correlation there. So that was the kind of environment that like that you like grew up in for 16 years, like in your marriage, in your relationship, ever since that kind of summer camp.
Yeah.
How did you move from that to non-monogamy?
Yeah, so for us that dynamic played out for a really long time of him
Hmm.
just having that higher drive, me shaming him, him just struggling with the shaming, of course,
Hmm.
and him sort of also kind of continuing to push boundaries, because another thing that purity culture really robs us of is consent, is learning about consent. We
Yeah.
don't, I mean, I don't think I heard the word consent until I was fully deconstructed.
Hmm.
um and so that dynamic just continued to sort of like play out in our relationship, and so we eventually like went and like sought out a sex therapist, and she encouraged me to really think about my own desires and my own fantasies, and like I remember her just like looking at me and being like, well, what are you into? And I honestly could not answer that, because up until then our entire intimate relationship had been all about what he wanted. And so I did. I just like basically, she also gave me like, at this point I had started sort of deconstructing my faith and sort of pulling that apart. And she gave me like the permission to really like lean into like masturbation and like that, because we were taught as well like that that's wrong. So
Wow.
like not only were we being taught that we couldn't have sex with someone else, we genuinely were taught like we couldn't even like do that with ourselves. So it was the first time that someone had been like, it's not wrong, you can explore your sexuality, figure out what turns you on. And so I started to do that. I started to think about it, and had a couple experiences, went to Vegas with some friends, came back, like shared, like we didn't do anything, but like my friends danced with some guys, and I came back and like shared that with my husband, and he was like, oh, you should have danced with people. And I was like, what? Like
Oh.
it just totally threw me, because like for him, like he just had never internalized the part of Christianity that had shame around sexuality, because I don't know if he was just getting different messaging as a man, but that's like my best guess at this point, is like that they weren't really talking to the boys like they were the girls,
Yeah.
which lines up with like that women are the holders of
Yes.
sexual experiences and all that. So
Yes.
he was quite like kinky, I guess. Like he was outside the vanilla box for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Because like he again like did not care as much about the like sexual shame part of Christianity. And so he like encouraged me basically to continue this path of exploration, and that went on for like several months. And then we started to like talk about I remember like really fun like experiences where like I was like admitting to him for the first time that I had looked at porn, and like that was fun and exciting for us and all of that. And so this just like slowly morphed into me sharing fantasies about being with someone new, because for myself I had never even kissed anyone else.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
so just kind of sharing with him like, oh, I wonder what that would be like, and that was not something he had ever even thought about, which surprised me, because I had thought about it, but like there comes like my non-monogamous self sort of like appearing for the first time. And so we just like slowly unraveled that ball, and we got into the space of non-monogamy like online. I had asked him like how he would feel about me talking to other people, just to sort of explore, and he was okay with it. Again, I think because he was just very excited about me sort of becoming this new person.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It's a
and
self-discovery
so,
journey. I think that's exciting, to watch someone you love like kind of find out new things about themselves. Like that's always kind of it's scary as well, but I think it can be a very fulfilling experience.
yeah, and I think what really happened, and I can obviously like hindsight is 2020, but I like to like draw the correlation between like not having a good like sexual education when you're young, like and going into like and having and being under purity culture and all of this, to kind of what happened to us, where we were not at all prepared for non-monogamy. Like
Okay.
we had not done the research, we didn't even know what we were doing, we were just like, this is really fun, and um basically didn't like again like it's just it seems so naive now to say it, but we had been taught our whole lives that like once you find your soulmate that God had appointed for you, then that would be it. You wouldn't like how there's no way you would fall in love with someone else, right?
Because you'd found the one, so you couldn't possibly, you're locked
Right.
in.
It sounds so naive, and I'm just like, because I remember like a conversation that my friend had with me who wasn't a Christian. She was like, so you guys are exploring non-monogamy, and I'm like, yeah. And she's like, well, what happens if you fall in love with someone? And I was like, oh, that's not gonna happen. Like I love my person, like I have my person.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's just like so naive. And I mean, this is part of the reason why I like am doing like a lot of the work that I'm doing now, because I definitely want to help people, and especially people who are coming from that like that Christian mindset of like, I'm finding the one that God has for me, like, so this will be fine, whatever. So
Mm, mm,
basically, like, long story short, we all know like that's not real. And I ended up like developing really strong feelings for someone that I met through that like online experience. And after like many years of sort of trying to like go back and forth between trying to sort of reconcile that and figure it out, I just pretty much was like, I think that non-monogamy is just so much more realistic for someone like myself.
mhm,
I don't think that I can be with one person who I've been with since I was 16 years old for the rest of my life in a monogamous way.
mhm,
And I did come to him and tell him all once I had kind of like discovered polyamory. That was something that came a little bit further into the journey, but started to once I developed those feelings for that other person, I was like, wait, you can love more than one person at a time. Okay.
yeah,
Oh, it's called polyamory. Okay.
mhm,
And ended up like approaching him about it. And yeah, I mean, could go into the whole long story of like the 3 years that was between that, but long story short is that it just didn't really work for him, and that's not what he wants for his life, which is totally fine and valid.
mhm.
um but ended up like that I'm moving into more of like a solo poly life at this point. So yeah.
Mhm. And do you just do the two of you have children?
Yes, yeah, we
Yeah.
do.
And so do they know about all this stuff that's been going on?
No, they're still young.
No,
So
okay.
yeah, and they wouldn't, that's the thing is like, we could all sit here and just go like, oh, it was polyamory. It was that she discovered she's polyamorous or wants polyamory. But like, there's so much more to the story and to relationships and incompatibility
Mhm.
that people don't know or see. So,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. There's often more layers to it all the time. And I think,
right.
like, yeah, like I think like what you said about how like you had this naive idea that like once you found your person, that was it, you were locked in. And um it's interesting because like I really don't think that's unique to kind of people who grew up like very religious, right? Like I think there's this belief that like you found the one, you don't need to work hard anymore because you'll just be happy forever. The
Yeah.
Disney happily ever after narrative, right? And but like the reality is that like relationships take work, and then particularly in long-term relationships, like desire has to be cultivated. And you know and a lot of people don't realize that. They just assume like if you love someone, then everything else should come easily, and that isn't the case at all.
Yeah, yeah. And so it kind of frustrates me in some ways that people can look at our story and like point to polyamory or non-monogamy and go, oh, that's what went wrong. And when
Mm,
really like we all know that like there's so much more to it. Like for instance, like compatibility wise, like our faith just completely, I mean, his faith stayed the same, but my faith changed a lot.
right.
And so I no longer consider myself a Christian. I basically like label myself agnostic.
Hmm.
But that was not something like for him. He was able to maintain his faith, and his faith stayed really important to him. And
Mm,
so
mm,
that was just like another piece of like the pie here of sort of incompatibility between the two of us.
hmm.
Um, but I think polyamory definitely was like the final piece that was like, this is definitely just pointing to incompatibility and totally different directions for our future.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's really important to highlight that because so many relationships fall apart like after opening up, and a lot of people don't realize that like you go through quite a lot of changes, right? Like when you're opening up a relationship, firstly obviously you're kind of like transitioning like like the entire kind of foundation of your relationship, right? You know, monogamy is like based in exclusivity, and you've just taken that away, and that's massively destabilizing. And then there's like the whole thing of, you know, you're unlearning everything you were taught to believe about relationships, about love, you know, the idea that you have your soulmate, your other half, you know, like that kind of deconstruction and like that kind of unlearning of core beliefs is also like a really massive change. And then not to mention like the self-discovery journeys that each of you were going on, right? And you know, sometimes you come out the other end and you're not even recognizable to each other at all. And so, you know, it's, yeah, like you said, it's very easy to just point the finger and go like, oh, polyamory fucked this up. But you know, like the amount of change and the different types of change that go through that happen like when like a monogamous couple like open up their relationship cannot be understated. And I think that people kind of brush over this for some reason because it's really hard. You know, I genuinely really commend couples who are able to kind of make that transition and still be together on the other side, because it's not just due to like immense amounts of skill and communication and trust, but also luck. Because sometimes you go on that self-discovery journey and then you become a different person, and that can't be controlled, that can't be helped, right? And you have to be immensely lucky to be on the other side and still with your partner at the end of it.
Yeah, it's almost like you kind of have to go on a similar evolution journey.
Exactly.
And I see it happening in the deconstruction community as well. Like one spouse might completely deconstruct and again, like I did, like and consider themselves agnostic, and one, you know, their faith is super important to them. So yeah, it's just all about sort of acknowledging that we can evolve, and we I don't know, for the couples that are able to sort of do it together and stay at the same similar paces, I think it's really cool. I also really like the analogy of just like imagining like a whole new relationship. Like,
Yeah.
I know that Esther Perel
Yes.
talks about like when an affair happens and like
Yeah.
just you're basically like burning the whole thing down and starting new, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, you know, not to sound extreme or anything, but I do feel like that is probably pretty similar when you change your relationship structure. You kind of do have to create a whole new like relationship together.
Yeah.
And if you're both not on the same page about what that relationship looks like, it's going to be pretty rocky.
Yeah, I remember Jessica Fern in Polysecure, like in the early kind of chapters of that book. I remember her mentioning that, or was it that, I'm not sure whether it was Polysecure or one of her YouTube lectures, but she kind of compared opening a previously monogamous relationship to, you know, like demolishing a house and just reconstructing it. Because she was like saying how it's not like you're building a fancy extension, you're not like renovating and kind of repainting the walls, like you are burning the whole thing down and like building it up again. And
Right.
yeah, and I think that lines up with what Esther Perel said as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It is tough. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I think it's possible. But I think for those of us who come from a Christian background or oppressive religious background, especially those of us who are trying to make this transition with a spouse that they married
Mm-hmm.
in that background, it presents a lot of challenges.
Yeah, like I think anytime you have to question an entire belief system, like obviously that's going to be, you know, you don't know what it's going to be like on the other side. So
Right.
you don't identify as Christian anymore.
Yeah.
But you know, do you think that, I mean, obviously, like I do know that, like, you know, there are polyamorous Christians out there, and there are polyamorous people who like all kinds of religions. But you know, what's your personal take on kind of reconciling Christianity and polyamory, or I guess specifically, you know, like evangelical kind of Christianity?
Yeah, I mean, I think polyamory is this beautiful thing where we all sort of just kind of go, whatever works for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I go with that same mindset. And when it comes to faith, and I do know a lot of people who are able to have some kind of faith, even Christian faiths, and are polyamorous.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's a video by I really want to get him on my podcast. I haven't talked to him yet, but a guy who runs queer theology on Instagram.
Okay.
You can find he does a video that is about Jesus is polyamorous. So yeah, I think that there are definitely people out there, especially there's like a lot of like, I've noticed there's a lot of like queer polyamorous folks, which is amazing and beautiful. And so I'm going to be definitely one of my first few episodes of my second podcast season coming up. I will be talking to someone who considers themselves a Christian and is polyamorous. So I'm excited. I'm excited to talk to them and just sort of like understand how they can like sort of reconcile that their faith with these ideas. But yeah, I mean, at the basis of it, it's just love, right? It's just that love is abundant. And I think realistically, like God is love. And if you're able to like, I don't know, just lean into that, I definitely understand how people can maintain their faith and be polyamorous too. So.
Yeah. Love thy neighbor, taken to, literally.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think, I think the main thing is just like sexuality. So like if you really hang on to that sex outside of a monogamous hetero relationship is sin, then you would never be able to make that kind of transition. So
Okay.
that's why I think there's a lot of like queer Christians who are able to be like, yeah, like why wouldn't we, So
yeah, for sure. Okay, well, so it's kind of so you can reconcile Christianity and like religion and polyamory, obviously, but then it's purity culture and polyamory that you think like would not mix.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. I think just like shame around our sexualities and our desires and stuff is not going to bode well if you're seeking a polyamorous structure.
For sure. Yeah. So like now you identify as solo polyamorous, and I guess like what motivated you to kind of gravitate towards solo polyamory specifically rather than kind of any other type of polyamory?
I'm open to however whatever way my life goes. Like I could never have anticipated 10 years ago having these thoughts and desires and going in this direction. So I'm really just open to whatever, but like right now I'm a single parent and I definitely don't want to live with anyone. So that just right away kind of like knocks off a nesting partner. But yeah, and I think for myself, like because I had been with my ex since I was 16, there's just a really important part of myself that I'm still discovering. I'm like, for instance, I had a feeling that I was demisexual, but I had no way of knowing before becoming non-monogamous.
Right.
Or again, like with my sexuality, like just exploring all of those questions. And so for myself, solo polyamory is like I think the best way to like really be the most liberated in my choices. Like no one has the ability to have a say over what I do with my body or who I love.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
I just really identify with that. And, again, I don't know who I will meet. I don't know how things will change and what I'll want. And I honestly, I don't know if I will always maintain a polyamorous relationship structure. I can see myself like, I don't know, I often contemplate like if I were in a relationship, like an anchor partner relationship that allowed me to like have the freedom with my connections that I really wanted, will there be parts in my life where we appear monogamous? Like sure, I'm totally open to that.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to date anyone who is going to shut the conversation down like before it even begins. And so because of that, like I conduct all of my connections in a way that everyone knows how I feel about like love, and that I am not going to cut love off because someone else told me to.
Absolutely. Yeah, that completely makes sense. So yeah, I think it's really important. And I've said this on kind of with like previous guests like on this kind of series already, where it's important not to kind of let your identity and labels be so fixed that they end up no longer serving you, right? Like some people kind of attach themselves to like a certain style of polyamory or a certain identity or a certain sexuality for so long that like when the reality doesn't kind of match up to it, like they still kind of cling on to that because it's all they've ever known. And I think it's very important not to kind of box yourself in, just in case like you might want something different in a couple of years, and it's okay, like I said, like labels aren't commitments, and it's important to kind of allow for flexibility. So it's good that you're open to kind of like whatever comes, really. And I completely understand that after being in like a 16-year marriage or like relationship, you would kind of want to break out of that and kind of basically experience a complete opposite, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it does feel like, okay, what is the ultimate freedom for myself, to kind of figure out who I am? And that's the stage of life that I'm in now, which has been really amazing.
Yeah, for sure. So I kind of wanted to touch on, like you mentioned just now that you identify as demisexual, or like you think you're demisexual. And I remember like when you first started your account, like we had a conversation like way back,
Mhm.
where we were talking about how, purity culture might have had like an effect on, someone kind of identifying like as demisexual. Um,
Yeah.
and do you have any particular thoughts on that? And I understand this is kind of like thorny to talk about because obviously I don't want to say that like every demisexual person is just like suffering under purity culture. Obviously I'm not saying that, but then
Yeah.
as someone who I did identify as demisexual at one point in time, and then later I just discovered, oh no, it was just like I was a bit sheltered, and now
Mhm.
I'm a massive slut. I identify I'm the furthest from demisexual I could possibly be,
Mhm.
and that was my personal journey.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was wondering if you had kind of any thoughts on that.
Yeah, and definitely acknowledging again, like demisexuality is valid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for myself, like the beginning of walking into non-monogamy, I just was like so, get probably the same thing, like sheltered, shy, and just again like just felt like shame for like having these sexual feelings and stuff. And so I kind of associated that with like, okay, well maybe I need an emotional connection in order to get sexual, so that must mean that I'm demisexual. um
Yeah, yeah.
and I think like for myself, like what non-monogamy has given me is the freedom to explore that in a way. So like right now I feel like this is where I'm at right now. Demisexuality for me looks like I can still feel sexual attraction to people, but it's like I like to describe it like having an appetizer but not the full meal. That's
Okay.
what it feels like to me. So like for me, it's like I I can have a sexual experience with someone I don't have an emotional connection with, and it's fun, and it's like a good appetizer. It's
Mm-hmm.
delicious.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't walk away from that experience feeling satisfied. Like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, that was great, you know? And for people who I have like deeply emotional connections with, and we can like cuddle and talk afterwards and all of that, like it just feels like such a more fulfilling experience. So yeah, I think for me, like just the fact that I'm even getting the chance to like figure this out has
Mm-hmm.
been like the most incredible feeling for myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, completely. Like, I mean, like for me, like I just remember, like, even though I wasn't like, raised very religious, like my parents had fairly conservative values when it came to sex. They were each other's first kiss and all of that.
Mhm.
Um, and so, like my mom was always like, you shouldn't have sex with someone unless you kind of, you've already gotten an emotional bond, and like that's kind of because like sex is meaningful and it has to be like tied to love, like for it to you know, like be good or something. And then so, you know, I very much internalized that belief. And so, you know, like I, like with my first boyfriend when I was 16, like I waited 9 entire months before we had sex, which was a big deal for me, I think. Like at the time, like looking back, I'm like, I have sex on the first date now. I can't believe I waited 9 months like back then. And yeah, and because like I really like wanted to be sure, like, or whatever. And you know, like well, what ended up happening, and this has nothing to do with my sexuality, but like what ended up happening that kind of tarnished like the whole, like that whole belief for me, because I was so focused on like finding like the one who I would have sex with, and then, you know, like it would be so meaningful and beautiful, and you know, I wouldn't regret it or like whatever. Like I found out about 2 months after the fact that like prior to the first time we had sex, so we had both lost our virginities to each other. um he cheated on me 2 weeks before we had sex for the first time, and I had no idea. um and so like, you know, that definitely tarnished the experience for me, you know, like at like knowing that like I'd shared such a vulnerable moment with my partner at the time, and he had been lying to my face for like 2 weeks. And he continued to keep that up for like 3 months. You know, he confessed the truth to me about 3 months later, but you know, the damage had been done.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
Well,
then I was just like, oh my god.
yeah, you had internalized that it was like this special thing.
Yeah, and you know, it is a vulnerable moment, right? Because like I think, you know, like a first time, like it's invasive, you know, if you're like a vulva owner, right? And you and it can be painful, and it's like, and it's massively anxiety inducing. Like you can bleed, and it's like, you know, I think it's a much bigger deal like for someone with a vulva than for someone like with a penis, because just like there's so many more factors like involved in kind of, you know, like the experience. And so yeah, like I wanted it to be special. And so, you know, to find out after the fact that like, you know, he'd been lying to me, I think I was just like, well, fuck that.
Yeah. Why
um
did I
yeah,
wait for this? Yeah.
yeah, why did I wait for this? And oh, and you know, I still, you know, I still have fond memories of my first time, because like, you know, apart from like all of that contextual stuff, like it was embarrassing, it was hilarious, but it was vulnerable, and it was nice, you know, like I, you know, it's fine, you know, it is what it is. But then it definitely kind of showed to me that like, you know, sex is not, it shouldn't be as big a deal as I make it out to be. um
Yeah.
yeah.
I think this conversation like bodes well to like whether or not you ironically whether or not you like support like sex workers and stuff. Because
Mm,
like because I think like if you put such emphasis on like how special intimacy is in that
yeah,
way, like
yeah.
it would be hard for you to wrap your head around like people who choose to just like have sex like or casual sex like sex
Mhm.
workers, people who enjoy casual sex, all of those. If you think that you're like I don't know, like giving away a part of yourself, or you have some like weird like soul tie to a person that you like,
Yeah,
because this is really what people think. Like like if you have I guess it's just PIV. I don't know, but like
yeah.
you are giving a part of yourself away. Like, of course, that would be hard to wrap your head around. Like people who just literally look at sex like an activity, just like any other activity that we could be doing with our bodies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's like you bring up such a good point, because you know, now like I've evolved to a point where, you know, sex is just like a hobby for me at this point, like
Yeah.
genuinely. You know, like I have fun with it, you know, I like doing it with my friends, you know, like I it's like a very casual thing, you know, it's a way I express kind of affection for people. You know, I don't think I have like a close friend who like I haven't had some kind of like sexual relations with. You know, whether like we ended up kind of being kind of sexually compatible or not, like, you know, there's probably been kind of some form of experimentation there. And I like it, I enjoy it, you know, like I think it's self-care. um yeah, and so, you know, like it's wild to me that, you know, just like 6 years ago or whatever, like I was, you know, at the complete opposite end of the spectrum. I was just like, I need, you know, it needs to be special, it needs to be like with like it needs to be in the context of like a committed kind of loving relationship or whatever. And now I'm just like
Totally. Yeah, I'm there too. I mean, I definitely took that journey as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, like I would love to kind of hear a little bit more about, like deconstructing process, because like I think like when I, when followers come to me and clients come to me kind of talking about uh like unlearning mononormativity and purity cultural, like whatever else, I think like there's a lot of, logically, like I know that like this belief I have is harmful and it's not really serving me, but I don't quite know how to internalize like the new belief. And I was wondering if you like had like a particular process for kind of unlearning like all this stuff that you grew up with, or whether it was just something that came with time. Could you say more on that?
Yeah, I think mostly it just comes with time. It's a little piece by piece unraveling of everything that you sort of believed before. I mean, I think deconstructing your faith looks very similar. It's parallel paths to deconstructing mononormativity as well.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
you can't just go from being in a monogamous relationship where you think that person's your soulmate and then the next day want to be in a polyamorous relationship. These things happen over time. So yeah, I think I personally would like to develop a little bit more like resources around like the purity to polyamory sort of pipeline.
Yes, very
Um
alliterative, PPP. Yeah.
and like yeah, and I think that it looks different for a lot of people, but it can be so overwhelming because you're basically just unraveling all these parts of your life like
Mm-hmm,
at the same time.
mm-hmm.
Or often, obviously, like a lot of people go deconstruction and then they're like, wait, why am I still in this relationship structure that I got into in while I was a Christian, and nothing makes sense anymore. Why would I stay in this kind of relationship structure?
Yeah.
um, so yeah, it just is sort of like an unraveling of all of it and in a piece by piece. And I think the best thing to do is just for people to know that this is like a really, really big process.
Mm.
uh, Going from monogamy to polyamory is huge, is like a fucking turn your world upside down. But like if you're coming from that religious background as well, it's just another added extra layer of unlearning everything you knew.
Yeah. And like you said, there are many parallels, right? I think in both purity culture and mononormativity, there's the idea of the one true love, right?
Yeah.
And there's like the whole idea of, I guess, you like the more you kind of save, like the idea, like things like sex and love and affection or whatever are like scarce, and you need to kind of save it for someone. I think maybe that isn't so much the case in mononormativity, but I think there is still kind of this idea, like you're not supposed to kind of be with other people because you need to kind of save that kind of thing and make it special for your partner, right?
Yep.
And I don't know, like what other parallels are there? You'd probably be able to answer this better than me. Those are the two that come up for me.
Hmm. I mean, well, so here's one, like jealousy. So like
Mm,
um we are taught as Christians that God is a jealous God.
okay.
That he's jealous for us. I don't even really understand like what that's supposed to mean for us, but like just that he's jealous for our love and that he wants our love.
Oh.
And so I mean, and then you go like you move into like, well, like the church is the bride of Christ, like that's in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically the idea that like toxic masculinity is so prevalent in the Christian church. And then like on top of it, it's literally teaching men to be jealous and
Mm,
to have these traits of like possession over your spouse.
right.
So yeah, I mean, can you imagine like the going from monogamy to polyamory? You're already like having to really like let go, like give freedom to your spouse and like acknowledge that they are their own individual. And like, and deal with your jealousy and look at jealousy as something like, you know, we as a reflection tool, you know, instead of being like, well, it's a good thing, because it's literally taught that it's a good thing that our God like is jealous for us or whatever. So that's another thing that I think comes up often, is just like majorly deconstructing toxic masculinity ideas.
And I think in mononormativity as well, like jealousy is seen as good, you know, like, and it's seen as kind of like it's seen as romantic, even it's seen as cute, like if your partner is jealous. And you know, while like I, you know, a little bit of jealousy is probably fine, you know, like that can be taken to very extreme lengths. You know, like I see kind of TikTok, like prank TikToks all the time on straight TikTok, where you know, people are like trying to make their partners jealous and trying to get a reaction out of them, like for fun. And it's just like, why would you do that? Like, yeah, and it's just like, and if they don't get jealous, then you get angry. Like I remember watching a TikTok where like this guy, like so like he was, you know, like his girlfriend was doing her makeup in the bathroom or whatever, and then he came over and he was like, hey, I'm going out with Kelsey tonight. And he would kind of waited, kind of expecting her to be like, who's Kelsey, you know, like who are you spending time with, or you know, like whatever. But his girlfriend was just like, okay, have fun. And he proceeded to throw a fit. He like literally proceeded to just be like, you know, why aren't you jealous? Or, you know, like kind of expecting her to have more like of a moment of possessiveness or whatever, and being angry that she wasn't upset. And I think like that's kind of when things just get a bit fucked.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, so to just have like that, like also like us to be told that like God is that way.
Yeah.
And like that's what we're aspiring to be like, is like God, you know, like Jesus or whatever.
This omnipotent, omniscient, all-powerful God who, you know, is like so good and perfect, but is jealous.
I know, it's so weird to me now. I'm just like, oh wow, yeah. So it's definitely a lot of undoing all of that conditioning that we were subject to.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think you're doing some great work like on your platform, and you know, so I would love for more people to kind of know where to check you out. So where can people find you on social media?
Sure. Okay, so I am on Instagram at Purity to Polyamory. I'm on Twitter. I think I'm pretty sure my Twitter handle is Purity to Polyam, because I could not put all
15 characters and all.
Yeah. And I have a podcast as well called Purity to Polyamory. I have 8 episodes out now. I host mostly guests that have a religious background and are now walking into non-monogamy, polyamory. I did have Jessica Fern on during the first season, which was a really awesome episode where we talked about this specific like pipeline, Purity to Polyamory, and how she has seen people who she's worked with be affected by it and stuff. So that's a great episode if you want to check that out. But yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. And thank you listeners for listening to the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne.